Welcome to my channel. Welcome back if you've been here before. The video I uploaded earlier this morning had been about trying to meld the internal family systems model with the Dramatica story structuring, story model together, trying to understand how the mind works and developing my own model, fusing these two together and possibly other aspects and understandings that I've picked up about the mind. So in my previous video, I wondered about different identities that people have. Hypothetically, somebody could have an identity, like for example, I have a Jewish identity. I conceive of myself as a Jew. I also have a storytelling film enthusiast identity, and I have various other identities. How would they meld together? Because I don't think of myself as just one identity. I think of there are different passions I have, different interests I have. So I thought about Dramatica. I was trying to fuse in Dramatica with internal family systems, and Dramatica has this thing where you have a quadrant of four different aspects, four different perspectives on a situation. And so the thought occurred to me that in film structure, as the Dramatica theory shows, you could have a conflict told through four perspectives. That those four perspectives, that what it calls a story form, has 70-something, 80-something different aspects of one conflict. However, sometimes in longer films, you can have two sort of separate stories intertwined together, and that's a matter of how the author chooses to weave the stories together. Two examples which come to mind, of course, written by the same screenwriter, Lawrence Kasdan, Empire Strikes Back and Raiders of the Lost Ark. Now, Raiders of the Lost Ark has one conflict, essentially one movie, which is Indiana Jones. I forget what the goal is. Offhand, I forget what the goal is, but the impact character is, and forgive me for using Dramatica terminology that you may be unfamiliar with. You're free to go back and watch my earlier videos where I describe Dramatica more in depth. Indiana Jones, there's one storyline, one story form, one part of the movie that's Indiana Jones and what's his name? Belloc. And Belloc is the impact character. Indiana Jones is the main character. And I forget what the objective story through line, what everybody is involved with. And then the other story form, the other part of the movie, is the Nazis being the protagonists trying to get the Ark, and Indiana Jones being the antagonist trying to prevent them from obtaining the Ark. Now, this labeling that I have of Indiana Jones being the antagonist and the Nazis being the protagonist may seem odd to you, but in Dramatica, there's a very explicit definition of protagonist, a very explicit definition of antagonist. In fact, those two terms are what screenwriters have loosely labeled. In Dramatica, it's the pursuit character and the prevent character. And there's a goal that is, there's the goal of the story. The protagonist is not the good guy. He's not the guy you necessarily bond with. That's in the main character through line part of the story. The objective story part of the story is simply the goal and the pursuit character and the hinder character and the prevent character and the helper character and so forth. So the in the Nazi movie, the Nazis are clearly trying to get the Ark, trying to find the Ark, and then trying to use the Ark, unleash the power of the Ark. So they're clearly the protagonists, and Indiana Jones is doing everything he can to stop or hinder. Well, no, not hinder, because that would be a different character function. Um, as the antagonist, he's trying to prevent and stop the Nazis from obtaining the Ark and using the Ark. So the two stories are fused together. It's very clear if you watch it under that guise. In Empire Strikes Back, there are two separate story forms. There's the Empire being chased. I'm sorry, the rebels, the characters Han Solo and Luke Skywalker. Or, I'm sorry, Princess Leia and Han Solo and Chewbacca and the two droids in the Millennium Falcon, being pursued by Darth Vader and the Empire. It's one story. The other story is Luke Skywalker and his confronting Darth Vader. Now, you have two different stories interwoven together. That's why at the beginning of The Empire Strikes Back, it shifts. First, you see the probes, Darth Vader sending the probes out to look for Luke Skywalker. That's the Luke Skywalker and Darth Vader storyline. And it has all four through lines in it. That's how you can tell it's a fully told movie in and of itself. And then you are introduced to Han Solo and Princess Leia and the rebels being chased by the Empire. And you have that separate storyline. So you have the Empire versus the Rebel storyline, or Empire chasing Han Solo storyline, with its own relationship through line. You have the objective story, you have storyline, you have the relationship storyline, namely the relationship between Han Solo and Princess Leia, and you have Han Solo being the main character, or at least I think Han Solo would be the main character, and then Princess Leia being the impact character, and Princess Leia is the one that changes, and Han Solo remains steadfast. That's why there's that line at the end, or that's why the line feels correct at the end. That in the moment when Princess Leia finally says, "I love you," and then Han Solo says, "I know," because Han Solo has been remaining steadfast in his belief that Princess Leia actually does love him, and she's been suppressing it and in denial. She finally changes. She now accepts and acknowledges that she's in love with Han Solo, and he says, "I know." He remains steadfast in his knowledge. "I'm not going to change. I know you have always loved me, and now you are now finally acknowledging it." All right. So that's fully told, has all four through lines expressed. Then in the Luke Skywalker and Darth Vader one, there's a Luke Skywalker would be the main character, clearly. Han Solo, or Darth Vader would be another character. He doesn't become the impact character. Yoda is the impact character. So you have the main character and impact character through lines, and you have the objective story through line of Luke Skywalker in his obsession with finding Luke, and then Luke finally confronting him in the climax. It has nothing to do with Han Solo and Princess Leia. That's a separate film. So anyway, so you see there are two separate storylines. You often see two separate storylines woven together, or two separate story forms woven together in stories with movies that are longer, like 2 hours or something. It may be interesting to go to James Bond and see if there typically are two separate story forms. Incidentally, I haven't gone through all the classic James Bond movies. And there, at some point there's Casino Royale. I think that's a 21st film, and then the more modern one, Spectre, would be another one, and so forth. But in the classic ones, especially at least in Goldfinger, in terms of the main character and impact character, you have the impact character being the one to change. Um, this would make more sense if you watch my earlier videos about Dramatica, but the objective storyline in Goldfinger. Well, all right, I'll complete what I was about to say. I'm willing to bet that in the classic films, typically James Bond is a steadfast main character, and the leading lady would be the impact character who changes, and he remains steadfast. One of them has to remain steadfast, the other one has to change in order that you can see which one is the better approach in dealing with a conflict. So, I'm thinking the more modern movies with I can't remember the name of the actor, but in like starting with Casino Royale, the modern ones, um, I'm thinking that it's possible that James Bond becomes a changed character sometimes. I mean, in some movies, James Bond is the one that changes in the climax of the story, changes his personal attitude or approach on handling things. But anyway, going back to Goldfinger, sorry, this is becoming like a dramatic explanation video, but okay, I need to do that for what's coming up. Um, James Bond clearly is steadfast, and then it's clear in the very end that the leading lady changes under the um, impressive, um, um, good-looking James Bond. She changes her attitude, and she just changes in the end of the story. If you watch the movie, you can clearly see that, and clearly. James Bond actually says something like, I appealed to her maternal instincts, something like that. So, anyway, um, it'd be interesting to go through the James Bond movies because they are longer. There's the movie The Dark Knight, which I believe that too, if I remember correctly, may have two separate storylines. I think one of them is the Joker, and then I think one of them is a different villain, and they're woven together. And also, Batman Returns from like 1991, I think, something like that, may have two separate storylines woven together. Okay, so in real life, the way the mind, I'm figuring out this model of the mind, how under the Dramatica thing, how a real person, a real mind, could have different identities. And I'm thinking that maybe each identity could be like a separate story form where you have different sort of so-called sort of movies or different story forms woven together, and one takes hold. One story form takes hold depending on which situation you're in. Like um, if you're in the mindset, or if you're in a scenario calling for your my Jewish identity aspect, then that story form would kick in, and it would switch and be replaced by a different story form for a different scenario. So this may not make much sense, but it's where I am presently in terms of figuring out how the mind works. Okay, the other aspect of this was it ties in with something that I had begun to do. I wondered about my early instincts. It's sort of like an aptitude. Um, what passions, what interests do I have? What kickstarted them? Because I know what interests, what passions I have, but what inspired particularly those passions and not other ones? So I wanted to get a level beneath that. I wanted to get to the fundamental aspects of my mind that then led my life path towards having those passions. So I want to. I also want to mention that in terms of internal family systems, if you've seen my previous video, or if you know about internal family systems, you know that there are 8 C's that Dr. Richard Schwartz identified. It's briefly, if you haven't seen the other video, internal family systems. It's his concept that a single mind is made up of many parts, and and the parts have different. There are categories of parts. There are parts which are exiles. There are parts. There's a part which is a manager part, and there are other parts that are firefighters. And the exile parts are called that because they hold on to a trauma, and depending on how old you are, that little part remembers, or as long as that part knows or is aware, it thinks of that trauma as still existing, even though it may be many years since the trauma happened. It holds on to that trauma. And the firefighter part then puts out the flame, tries to put out the flames, or like tries to ease the suffering of the exile part. Exiled because it's exiled off due to this trauma. And the manager part tries to coordinate and organize all these different parts. And so, aside from that, you have the self. And the self, Dr. Schwartz would categorize as something very different. He found that people he was interviewing and treating, he was a therapist. People he was treating, the person would say, well, I feel very curious, or I feel very exuberant, or I feel in the zone, like I'm very curious, or I feel very calm, or I feel very creative. Well, which part is that? Well, it's not an exiled part, it's not the manager part, and it's not trying to put out the fires of one of the other exiles. It's like my own core self. I feel like my true self. I almost feel appropriate when I'm like in a praying motion here. My true self, and I link that with the Force as depicted in Star Wars. My own take on it from what I've seen in the original trilogy of Star Wars. I want to do a video. I want to do an essay too on my take on the Force based on references in the original trilogy, and of course my own take and my understanding how it seems very clear what they were getting at with the Force. And of course, thankfully, George Lucas had a big hand in writing these movies. To what extent exactly, I'm not sure, but he had a big hand in the themes and so forth in Star Wars. So, for better or for worse. But in this case, it's good because perhaps it's consistent. It seems consistent, the description of the Force. So, the Force, if you take away the levitation and the special effects and so forth and the mysticism, the Force seems to be describing this sense of self, like curious, calm, patient, compassionate, so forth. This sense of at least the light side of the Force, and then there's the mirror image would be the dark side of the Force. And I would like to do like a parallel, like what's the opposite of calm? What's the opposite of courageous? What's the 8 C's in Dr. Schwartz's 8 C's of the self. So in this one, I want to do something like an aptitude test or aptitude examination. I want to go through the passions I have in life and see if they have common ground. Sorry for the stupid whistle in the background, train whistle if you hear it. And identify the 8 C's that would be involved. So, all right, so you'll get what I mean. So these are the passions that I have had. Maybe I'll think of others. Stories and film, basically story structure, telling stories. It's one. Female impersonation, getting dressed up and trying to look like a female. Some people may call it drag, although I wouldn't say drag in terms of like high weird makeup. I mean like trying to look female. And that ties in with stage illusion. It's very much like being an illusionist. And theoretical, of course, okay, so you have storytelling, you have, which encompasses all aspects of film and TV and story structure and characters and dialogue and so forth. Then you have female impersonation. Then you have stage illusion, which is like David Copperfield and illusionists and so forth, and cutting a woman in half and so forth. Theoretical physics, which is not the same as what I would call mundane physics. It's figuring out, like developing a warp drive system and the particles that may or may not exist. Theoretical physics. You have Kabbalah, which is a mystical aspect of and a mystical aspect and a deeper understanding of Judaism. You have toys. As a child and even as an adult, this is an example of parts where parts, I suppose, parts or passions may lay dormant, but they never go away. Like my interest in Star Wars may lay dormant for a while, but it's like I never abandon it, I never leave it, unless Disney really screws it up. But even then, I would hold true to the original Star Wars. Anyway, it just remains dormant. Same thing with Transformers. So what I mean by toys is collecting action figures, having a fascination and a love for Kenner Star Wars figures and Transformers, and I was collecting a few other things, Mask and so forth, and video games. I had a Nintendo Entertainment System, the original classic 1980s Nintendo Entertainment System, and before that Atari, and so forth. The paranormal, UFOs, ghosts, the paranormal in general. So, and mermaids, fascination with mermaids, like an attraction. Now, these last two are more like attractions, mermaids and contortionists. So those are my interests. Maybe I'll think of others, but I want to go through and see what common core fundamental traits would be involved, because I see this as like, you have a surface layer at the top. You could write down, going across, you could write down various passions you have. And then what I suspect is that going down one level, you have, like, in my case, curiosity, calmness, visual aspect, and various, those kinds of core aptitudes or core instincts within me. And then a passion may network. You could draw lines to several, like a certain particular passion, like toy collecting, may have an aspect down here of organization or an interest in completing something, completion, and understanding all of it. So that's like a root instinct. And then another root instinct would be visual, visually attracted to things. So collecting toys would connect to both of those aspects. And then maybe a third, which would be tied in with the films. Like if it's Transformers, the toys, is tied in with the TV series, then it's like the TV series and all those aspects. So it's like networked in. So it's like, I'm imagining it'd probably be more like a crisscrossing set of lines between the top and bottom layers. These are the more core fundamental things like curiosity and maybe compassion, visual sense, and understand. Well, that's curiosity, but completion, stuff like that. And then the surface layer, more surface layer ones, which would be the ones that I just read off. So, all right. So I'm going to go through these and try to identify which ones, which core ones these seem to be involved with. These ones would be more like at the top. Okay, so stories and film. Well, and I'm also adding in the CC, the 8 C's: calm, compassion, curiosity, clarity, creativity. Well, the stories certainly involve creativity. Oh, of course, as I'm going through this, I'm going to present the case that the end result will be I'm very in tune with my core self. Which I've always felt. I've never strayed from that core self of calmness, compassion, curiosity, clarity, creativity, confidence, courage, and connectedness. And because I've always felt, I know who I am, and my mom encouraged, it created a nice, safe environment for me, for that to bloom and flourish within me. All right, so collecting, stories and film. So that would involve curiosity, figuring out how film works, and understanding themes that are presented in certain films, what the author is trying to say. You could, I guess, make a case that compassion works into it. I bond with certain characters, and that's connectedness. Certainly when I'm writing stories, when I'm watching stories, or when I'm writing stories, I want to feel connectedness with the characters that I'm designing or the characters that I bond with in movies that I enjoy. Um, I'm very visually oriented, and I wonder about that. That's not part of the 8 C's, but I noticed I just seem to be very visually oriented. That ties in later with contortion and mermaid attraction to mermaids. Um, and then female impersonation. Well, that also deals with visual. So I'm attracted to visual things. And creative, you have to figure out how it's like Halloween. You have to figure out how to create this illusion and be imaginative and just like creative, and also creativity and problem solving. I think work hand in hand. Um, Curiosity. One of the things that got me into female impersonation was curiosity about what it's like to step in the shoes of a woman. I can't do it completely, blah, 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 but I'm curious how people would interact with me and so forth to gain that experience. Um, Stage illusion. Well, that too involves curiosity, figuring out how something works. Like when I see a magic, sadly they don't have TV specials really anymore where you have these stage illusionist specials on TV the way they used to, but just simply trying to figure out how the trick was done. Um, there's curiosity. Um, I don't know. Clarity doesn't really come up. Visual. I'm visually attracted to um, looking at the stage illusion, figuring out how it's done. You have to be creative in order to figure out how to do illusions yourself, or and also appreciate the creativity of the magician. Um, Not much else there. Theoretical physics. Certainly a lot of curiosity. Um, I don't know about creativity. Certainly trying to understand curiosity, trying to understand how the universe works. There's an element of imagination. Kabbalah, same thing. Even though some people may say differently, I think the mindset towards Kabbalah, trying to understand the universe, is also the same that you would apply, the same kind of instinct that you would apply towards theoretical physics. It's just you have different experiences or it's a different bent. Um, and I will throw in, I'll jump down a little bit, the paranormal. I'm curious, although I understand there are other explanations for UFO sightings and so ghost sightings and so forth, I'm still curious about what about perception, how people perceive things and misperceive things, and so forth, and also what could have actually been going on, maybe military testing or whatever. I'm just genuinely curious. What other, just the very fact that I'm curious about other possible explanations for UFO sighting or whatever. There's curiosity. So I jumped down to there. I skipped over toys, which I've talked about a little bit. Well, there's a visual attraction, and I guess you could say there's a creative attraction. I mean, there's a creative aspect. You're appreciating the creativity of the person who designed the action figure or toy. There's a connectedness. I feel some sense of connectedness or bonding with the toy. I remember more often, I wasn't one to like play bang bang with the toys, even with Transformers or whatever. More than likely, I would pick them up and just examine them and as works of art. So there's an element of connectedness I have with the toy. I heard a friend of mine, I don't know whether it's true or not, but I heard a friend say that there's a Japanese, I'm not saying that the Japanese believe this now, but there's like a saying or belief from what he said. There's a saying, belief that the toys themselves, something created, has a soul in it, and I think there's something to that. In other words, the creativity, the imagination, and the personality of the designer of the toy put part of himself into designing the toy. So there's a connectedness there. And video games, that's interesting. Well, visually, it's an interesting way of testing yourself visually. There's hand-to-eye coordination. I don't know where that would fit in here. There's hand-to-eye coordination. What do I find interesting and appealing about something like Super Mario Brothers? First of all, I like the character aspect, the literally the characters and the storyline in video games. So I guess part of it, instinctively, I feel, it seems very natural. Part of my interest in video games is actually is the same attraction I would have for film. You have a storyline, you have characters, and you're pursuing a goal. So I guess the attraction to video games and the attraction to movies and TV and storylines would be the same instinct, rooted in the same instincts. And I get down to attraction to mermaids. I think obviously it's very visual. Obviously, I want to do this as a separate video. I want to find out, there are two things. There's fetishes and there are kinks. And beyond that, or more fundamental than that, I want to know what determines which kinks or fetishes, or just like what we find attractive. Um, what, where does that come from in each of us? Why is one person attracted to these things sexually, and versus somebody else who is attracted to other things? So I want to understand that better. Of course, going back to mermaids and contortionists. Visual style. Well, there's a sense of bonding. I find, I've mentioned this before, even with female impersonation. There are, all right, I'll put this aside for a moment. Certain very visual things I find myself so connected to. It's one of the 8 C's in Dr. Schwartz's sense of self, aspects of self. I find myself connected so much, I bond so much, that I not only am attracted, sexually attracted to this thing, but I also want to bond and experience that for myself. So, female impersonation, I'm very attracted to women, visually attracted to women, and I also want to experience what it feels like. The same thing with mermaids. Same exact thing with mermaids. Same exact thing with contortionists. So I want to do more study. I want to understand this sexual attraction, where that comes from in terms of understanding the mind. And I'm not going to be salacious about it. I mean, I really want, seriously, I want to understand it better, because that's a driving force in each of us. And that's part of our minds. I mean, it's all in the mind, what draws us to certain things. I thought about a notorious figure in human history. I don't want to mention his name, but maybe you can guess who I'm talking about. But some decades back. But he was an artist, or at least he drew, and people characterized his drawings as inhuman, very mechanical. And anyway, he had an aptitude for certain things, and his life path led him towards being the leader of a nation. But what if those experiences that enabled him, that steered him in that direction, what if other experiences had crept in and steered him into a different direction? A lot more people would be alive right now. But there are certain instincts in each of us, and I guess the life experiences lead us in certain paths. It's interesting if we have maybe perhaps we're very technically minded, we have an aptitude, so to speak, for using computers, or for very technical things, and not so much psychology related things or understanding people. you could go down. There's several different paths you could go down, and which one you go down depends very much on chance, opportunity, just plain luck, like random draw. Like it depends on uh, what the status of the and the wealth of the family that you're born into, um, life experiences, the times, what's available at the time. It just steers you in a certain direction. So anyway, that's where I am right now, and I don't know how long I've been talking. That's 35 minutes. Okay, it's not as long as I thought it was, but I just wanted to do this as a follow-up to my earlier videos. So if you enjoy stuff like this, topics like this, please consider subscribing to my channel and liking, especially liking this video and spreading the word around. I talk about topics and understanding the world and understanding yourself. So until next time, be well, and I'll talk to you next time. Talk with you, share with you next time.